So thank you very much. This is a bit of an awkward situation because Aniceto and I actually we work together, and it feels a little odd to be talking about a project that I'm doing with him about his community. But I think Aniceto would like to focus his presentation on some other aspects or some other issues happening in his community. So for that reason, I've kind of will be the spokesperson for today for the Health Tribunal. So a little background about how this Health Tribunal project came to be. Like Jen mentioned, I'm doing my PhD in nursing, and the idea was to go to San Miguel Ixtabacan and to spend some time focused on understanding the community health impact. For those of you who know the history of Gold Corp in Guatemala, particularly in San Miguel Ixtabacan, this was not the first study, right? I mean, there's lots of studies that have shown, they've shown arsenic contamination, there's lots of concerns about cyanide contamination, although there's not the technical, a lot of these studies are obviously very expensive. In terms of like physiological tests, there's been a pilot study that was done in 2010. En 2010 fue el estudio de Physicians for Human Rights. Sí. So in 2010, there was a Physicians for Human Rights study that looked at contamination due to the proximity to the water sources downstream from the mine, and it did find mixed results, although strong enough to verify that there are contamination issues. So people closer to the mine did have kind of higher levels of particular contaminants. I'm sure Aniceto's going to get into a lot of the context, so I'm not going to get into too much, and I'm going to try to narrow a little more in terms of health issues. So just a disclaimer on that. But in this community, which Aniceto will explain more, there hasn't been a free, prior, and informed consent before this gold mine entered the region, and it's caused a lot of divisions, and there's also some kind of when we consider the history of genocide and violence in Guatemala, issues like that and poverty and discrimination against indigenous peoples, those things really exacerbate the issue, and that really paints the picture for how the mine entered, right? So things like certain community members being approached by armed people and being told to sell their land, that has a different connotation that perhaps somewhere else where people might say, well, no, this is my land. So there are lots of different contexts that really played into how the mine entered without consent, and in my opinion, really that the mine was able to take advantage of the kind of challenges experienced by the community. So my focus, based on kind of the context a little bit in terms of what we knew academically and health science speaking, and just generally in terms of the context, was to look more at community health. And the reason I thought that this was really important is because when we look at all the studies that have been done in this area, the power of what knowledge is produced always comes down to the scientists, because, but the problem is it's an arms race, just like anything else, right? A study can always been critiqued for its methodology, for its technical, for what technical elements it includes. So in that case, we're talking just the same way when we talk legally, right? We're talking to an extent about finances, right? Who can finance bigger projects? Who can, and also, unfortunately, the mechanisms that are supposed to kind of bring truth or bring knowledge can also be co-opted, right? So for example, something that is said often in Guatemala is that, we can't prove that the mine brought this contamination because there haven't been baseline studies. So a lot of issues in terms of contamination, in terms of damages to houses, lots of houses have been cracked. The idea is to always, or the kind of the scientific tool that is used is to always say, well, maybe it was like that always, So, oh, that was a problem always. Or in the case of Honduras, where Goldcorp is also operating, and there's similar problems seeing, people were told that the rashes on their skin and the problems on their skin were due to their hygiene, right? That people didn't know how to wash themselves. So this is the level of kind of like technocratic battling that is happening, and that's not at all to discount. I think that those types of studies that look at kind of like hard data, if you will, and natural science is really important. But I think that what's being lost in this discourse is this idea of, well, what does the community think, and what does the community know? And that was kind of the focus of my study, is to look at, my background is mental health, is to say, okay, and I think the strength, in my opinion, of a mental health study is that the gold standard for data is subjective information. How people tell you they feel, how, what has changed, So things like family divisions, many people who are politically persecuted, who have symptoms of depression or characteristic of depression, folks who, were, tortured or kidnapped, who if they hear a loud sound, they have somatic pain all over their body. These are just some of the things, but like even clinically, which I was not there to kind of do assessments, but if we're gonna get into the technical aspects of it, like so much of the criteria is there in terms of post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression. A lot of people talked about flooding, for example. This idea of so much vigilance and so much political persecution that at some point it would just become so much, and it would feel like they would dissociate from their body, right? So these are just a few examples, and I'm going to keep it brief so that Aniceto has a lot of time, and hopefully, even though I've kind of given it, oh shoot, I should talk a little bit about the health tribunal, I guess. So anyway, this is kind of stuff that came out of the study. And after this, we had kind of a community consultation based on this, and we kind of talked about, so all the participants, which are about 54 people, men and women from ages 17 to 69, we talked about just what the data would make sense, because a lot of people come in and extract information, and I think whenever you do any study, any project, you have to be mindful of people's time and not assume that just because you're there and you're interested that's enough, right? I think, there's that saying about indigenous people kind of like overstudied but like underserved, or anyway, something like that. So it was really important for me from the beginning. People would always say like, well, what are you going to do? What's the point of this? And I was really transparent, and maybe because my alliances are more to activism, to research, is like, yeah, let's talk about this. What are we going to do? How are we going to use this information? So we had kind of a community meeting, and a couple different proposals were raised. We talk about maybe having a website, or maybe having a photo book that would kind of tell the story of the community, because not everyone knows the same information. Not everyone knows that so-and-so was told that orchids were going to be built in the land, right, instead of gold. Not everybody knows that so-and-so is bribed, or, so the idea was to have it all together. So that was one idea. Another idea was a website. Another idea was a photo gallery, because so much of this stuff comes, but then it's great, but it's used predominantly to educate a North American audience. But the community member said, we also need to educate each other. We're also divided. We also have issues. So because of that, a lot of these things were kind of seen as, they're not so much for us, especially a book. People thought, well, a lot of us can't read. It's going to be great to educate maybe people outside of our community, but what's it going to do for our community? And the key theme around everything was justice, and that's how we came to consensus around the health tribunal. And this health tribunal, it's not legally binding. It's an important political tool. I think it's a tool for direct democracy, as professionals generally tend to be. But so far, there's been a lot of enthusiasm around this, and I'm really excited to say that not only do we have folks from San Miguel Ixtahuacan participating, but other Gold Corp affected communities have heard about this event and would also like to get involved. So now we have folks from Honduras, we have folks from Mexico. We are still in the process of seeing if a community from northern BC who's also affected by Gold Corp can come. And I think this is really important, especially because so many of the things that cause harm in these communities are as much kind of technically irresponsible as they are politically irresponsible. So I think it's important to blend those two worlds a little bit and kind of strengthen this and document this and try to kind of use this as a tool for direct political pressure. So I'll leave it there for Aniceta, who I'm sure, and Aniceta is actually one of the local coordinators of the Health Tribunal, but I will stay there because I'm sure he can provide a lot more information for the community.